When Count Basie visited Billie Holiday in a Philadelphia jail in 1947, what Lady Day told him would haunt him for the rest of his life. "They want to kill me, Count, but first they're going to kill my soul." Holiday's arrest on the night of May 12th wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of Harry Anslinger's 8-month planning operation. Federal Narcotics Bureau agents had been waiting for the exact moment Holiday would leave the San Francisco clinic where she was getting treatment, striking when she was most vulnerable. When Basie walked out of that jail that day, he understood that what happened to his friend wasn't just a routine drug bust. It was revenge for strange fruit. The systematic destruction Holiday faced after that night would show America's true tolerance for artistic freedom. This isn't just a story about an arrest. It's documented evidence of state terrorism against one of America's greatest artists. If this content matters to you, subscribe to access more hidden stories like this. In the spring months of 1947, Billie Holiday finally saw light in her life. The 8 months she'd spent at a private treatment clinic in San Francisco meant rebirth to her. Lady Day was fighting with her last strength to break free from the heroin addiction that had held her in its grip for a decade, and for the first time it seemed like she might win. During her treatment at Dr. Herbert Berger's private clinic, she wasn't just trying to detox from drugs, but also from the emotional traumas that had dragged her into this darkness. The letters she wrote to friends from the clinic were full of hope. She thought she could finally find her old voice again, get back on stage. In a letter to Count Basie, she wrote, "Count, my voice is coming back. The demons whispering in my ear seem to have gone quiet." But what Holiday didn't know was that Dr. Berger's clinic phones were being wiretapped by the Federal Narcotics Bureau. Harry Anslinger's special agents were recording every conversation Holiday had, every sign of recovery, because for Anslinger, Holiday's recovery was an unacceptable situation. A black woman artist who used drugs getting her life back together would undermine Anslinger's racist propaganda. Even worse, Holiday returning to the stage meant strange fruit becoming popular again. That was a scenario the Federal Narcotics Bureau could never accept. Every day Holiday spent at that San Francisco clinic, Anslinger's operation plan became more detailed. In the first weeks of May, as Holiday prepared to complete her treatment, she was unaware of the trap waiting for her in Philadelphia. Federal agents had mapped out her return route to New York and decided to strike during her stopover in Philadelphia. The location wasn't chosen by chance either. Philadelphia was the state where Holiday's legal protection was weakest. Drug crime penalties in Pennsylvania were harsher than New York's, and local police cooperation with the Narcotics Bureau was more developed. Anslinger's 30 years of experience had made him a master at this. Federal Narcotics Bureau Chief Harry Jacob Anslinger's hatred for Billie Holiday wasn't just about drug use. Since the late 1930s, Anslinger had been using the drug war as a tool for his racist policies. To him, black musicians who used drugs were responsible for white American society's moral decay. Jazz music, especially improvisation culture, represented chaos and immorality according to Anslinger's conservative worldview. But Holiday was much more than these generalizations. She was a personal enemy to Anslinger. Her exposure of America's dirtiest secret, the reality of lynching through strange fruit, had made her the Federal Narcotics Bureau's #1 target. Notes Anslinger kept about Holiday in his private files reveal the extent of this obsession. "This woman is a dangerous propagandist," he wrote in one report. "Her music incites black rebellion and creates negative influence on white youth." From 1940 onwards, every Holiday concert, every recording session, even every detail of her private life was being reported by federal agents. The language Anslinger used when discussing Holiday in meetings with his personnel reflected a personal desire for revenge far beyond that of a professional law enforcement chief. According to one FBI agent's memoirs, Anslinger would refer to Holiday as that damned Negro woman. By 1947, Anslinger was looking for an opportunity to arrest Holiday. But this arrest couldn't be an ordinary drug operation. It had to end Holiday's career, discredit her in the public eye, and prevent strange fruit from spreading. When news reached Anslinger that Holiday was recovering at the San Francisco treatment clinic, This was his final alarm bell. Holiday coming out clean and returning to her career would make the Federal Narcotics Bureau's drug policies look ridiculous. That's why the operation had to be perfectly timed and create maximum damage. Anslinger's plan wasn't limited to just arresting Holiday. He'd also designed a media campaign that would completely discredit her in the public eye. Information fed to the press after Holiday's arrest portrayed her as an untreatable addict and a danger to society. News stories in Philadelphia papers made Holiday look like she was the leader of a crime organization. This media manipulation was also a carefully planned part of the operation. At 11:45 p.m. on May 12, 1947, Billie Holiday was taking her last breath of freedom at the Aldine Hotel in Philadelphia. In her room with her boyfriend Joe Guy, planning the next day's trip to New York, she was unaware of the quiet activity in the hotel lobby. Federal Narcotics Bureau agents under Colonel George Hunter White's command had been surrounding the hotel for 6 hours. White was one of Anslinger's most trusted operatives, specially chosen for the Holiday operation. Agents who slipped in through the hotel's back entrance had obtained a copy of Holiday's room key through a prior arrangement with the desk clerk. Even this detail showed how carefully the operation had been planned. In the first minutes after midnight, as Holiday talked with Joe Guy in the room, she heard strange sounds at the door. But these sounds seemed like normal hotel noise to her. When the door suddenly burst open, 6 federal agents and 2 Philadelphia police officers flooded into the room. Holiday's first reaction wasn't shock, but deep exhaustion, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. She just murmured, "So you came." As Colonel White informed Holiday that she was under arrest, the expression in Lady Day's eyes gave him a moment he'd never forget. This wasn't the look of a frightened criminal, but the last breath of a warrior accepting her fate. The evidence found during the room search was also suspicious. The amount of cocaine and heroin agents claimed to find in Holiday's bag was far more than a seasoned addict's personal use. Joe Guy would later tell friends that these drugs hadn't been among Holiday's belongings before. But the evidence chain of custody records were never questioned in court. Photos taken by federal agents during the arrest were also lost and never surfaced during the trial process. These details showed that the operation wasn't just an arrest, but part of a carefully designed conspiracy. Basie would later say about this night, "Billie told me that night was different. She felt like she could hear death's footsteps." The court process that began on May 27, 1947, was an open display of racist prejudice in America's legal system. While Billie Holiday's lawyers tried to bring irregularities during the arrest to court, Judge James Cullen McGrannery's attitude was hostile from the start. McGrannery was a politician who would later become Attorney General and had close ties with the Federal Narcotics Bureau. Even the way he looked at Holiday in the courtroom revealed that the outcome had been predetermined. The judge, disturbed by Lady Day's presence, systematically rejected the lawyer's objections. Holiday's defense line was that the drugs found during the arrest didn't belong to her. Joe Guy's testimony stating that Holiday was completely clean when leaving San Francisco and that these substances might have been planted later wasn't considered in court. Contradictions in federal agents' arrest reports, suspicious gaps in the evidence chain, and Holiday's treatment records, none of these affected the court process. The prosecution was charging Holiday not just with drug use, but also with disturbing social order. This was a very surprising development because Holiday's Strange Fruit song had never officially entered the court file. Throughout the court process, Holiday's psychological condition was deteriorating. She came to every hearing in handcuffs and was treated as if she were a dangerous criminal. Her public display was completely destroying her public image. Philadelphia newspapers described her as the black stain of the jazz world. Even Count Basie coming to the courtroom to support Holiday didn't change the situation. Basie would later describe those days. The light in Billie's eyes dimmed a little more each day. It was like they were burying her alive. When the court decision was announced on June 8, 1947, the sentence Holiday received was much harsher than expected. 1 year in prison and a $5,000 fine was excessive for a first-time drug user. But the real shock was the cabaret license revocation that came with the court decision. This ruling made it legally impossible for Holiday to perform in New York. Lady Day understood at that moment that this wasn't just an arrest, it was the planned execution of her career. When Billie Holiday walked out of Alderson Federal Prison Camp on March 27, 1948, she was no longer the same. 10 months of prison life had caused Lady Day to deteriorate both physically and psychologically. According to prison records, Holiday had behaved very well during her sentence and hadn't had problems with other inmates, but something inside her was broken. When she told Count Basie about her time in prison, she said, "Count, they didn't try to kill me there, but they stole my soul." Her first concert after prison was given at Carnegie Hall on the night of March 27, 1948. This concert was one of the most emotional moments in Holiday's career because she was reuniting with the stage lights she'd missed for 10 months. But the concert was also a bitter reminder. Without a cabaret license in New York, she could only perform in concert halls. Although the Carnegie Hall concert was sold out, Holiday lacked that intimate club atmosphere she'd developed. It was as if there was an invisible wall between her and the audience. Holiday's voice had also changed during the concert. Her formerly crystal-clear tone had become more hoarse and trembling. The stress of months spent in prison had caused permanent damage to her voice. But this change also added a different depth to Holiday's vocal interpretations. When she sang Strange Fruit that night, the hall gave her a standing ovation. But Holiday couldn't hide the tears in her eyes. Every word of the song was now part of her personal pain. The biggest difficulty Holiday faced in the months after her release from prison was that her cabaret license was still revoked. Not being able to perform in New York jazz clubs caused both income loss and artistic isolation. Holiday's best performances were given in intimate club settings, but this opportunity had now been taken from her. Every application she made for license reinstatement was rejected, and the reason was always the same: Social Security risk. During this period, the musicians supporting Holiday included not only Count Basie, but also Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins. These friends brought Holiday on stage as a guest artist in their own concerts. But these opportunities were also limited because federal authorities were also pressuring musicians who worked with Holiday. It was impossible to think of Billie Holiday's 1947 arrest independently from the Strange Fruit song. This song, written by Abel Meeropol in 1939, was the first musical protest to announce America's lynching reality to the world. The night Holiday first performed it at Café Society, the song's impact was felt by everyone in the room. But what Holiday didn't know was that federal agents watching that night were also present. Every performance of Strange Fruit strengthened the foundation of the operation targeting Holiday. For Harry Anslinger, Strange Fruit wasn't just a song. It was a declaration of war against the Federal Narcotics Bureau's racist policies. The effect of the lynching imagery in the song's lyrics on American society deeply disturbed Anslinger. Because the song exposed the racist motivations behind the drug war, every Strange Fruit performance by Holiday questioned the real purpose of the money Anslinger received from the federal budget. That's why silencing the song was even more important than silencing Holiday. Pressure on Holiday to remove Strange Fruit from her performance program gradually increased throughout the night. Record companies didn't want to record it. Radio stations avoided playing it. But Holiday wouldn't give up because this song had become an inseparable part of her artistic identity. Every Strange Fruit performance reminded her that she was being marked by federal authorities. Holiday's feelings about this could have been considered paranoia, but the 1947 arrest proved how real these fears were. Tapes of federal agents recording Holiday's performances show that nights when Strange Fruit was sung were specially marked. These recordings were part of the case file against Holiday, but were never used in court. Because the song itself wasn't illegal, but its political impact disturbed federal authorities. Anslinger's strategy was to punish Holiday not for the song, but for drugs. This way he achieved his goal while hiding his political motivation. Holiday would later tell friends, "Strange Fruit is going to kill me, but I'll keep singing it, because that song is bigger than me. New York City's cabaret license system had been used since the 1920s to control the city's nightclubs. But for Billie Holiday, this system became as deadly as a guillotine. The cabaret license that was automatically revoked after the court decision prohibited Holiday from performing in any bar, club, or restaurant in New York where alcohol was served. This ban didn't just cover singing, but also playing piano, even holding a musical instrument in such places. Since New York was the heart of American jazz, this ban was collapsing the center of Holiday's career. The real purpose of the license revocation system wasn't to punish musicians with drug records, but to systematically silence them. Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, and many other jazz legends had faced similar bans. But Holiday's situation was different, because the ban was applied not just because of her drug history, but also because of the political discomfort created by strange fruit. The Federal Narcotics Bureau was in close cooperation with the New York Police Department's Cabaret License Commission. Every application Holiday would make to get her license back was doomed to be rejected in advance. When Holiday's lawyers started legal proceedings regarding the license revocation, the wall they faced was very thick. The Cabaret License Commission claimed that Holiday was a social security risk and created bad influence on youth. These justifications weren't just related to drug use, but also to her musical style and song repertoire. The fact that Strange Fruit was on the banned list wasn't a coincidence. In the Commission's secret meeting minutes, it was written that Holiday's songs created racial tension. The economic hardships Holiday experienced during the ban period also seemed planned. Unable to perform in New York, Lady Day's income sources dramatically decreased. Record companies also began to shy away from working with her because federal authorities were also pressuring record companies. As Holiday's living standards dropped, the risk of drug use also increased. This was part of Anslinger's perfect plan, trapping Holiday in a vicious cycle. Count Basie tried to give Holiday every support he could during this period, but the impact was limited. The rare concerts where she could perform with Basie's orchestra were both financial and spiritual breathing room for Holiday. But these concerts were too few and not enough for Holiday to regain her old popularity. The 1947 arrest shaped the rest of Billie Holiday's life. After that night, Lady Day never became the same again because the shadow that fell on her grew heavier each day. The Federal Narcotics Bureau's systematic surveillance continued until her death in 19... Holiday's every move, every concert, every recording session continued to be reported. This constant pressure also prevented her from completely recovering from drug use. Harry Anslinger's campaign against Holiday remained the darkest example in America's artistic freedom history. The systematic attempt to destroy an artist because of her political views showed how fragile democratic values were. What Holiday experienced became a precursor to the pressure applied to artists during the McCarthyism period. The Strange Fruit song became an even stronger protest symbol after Holiday's death. During the 1960s civil rights movement, the song was revived, and Holiday's legacy continued to live as a symbol of political resistance. Nina Simone, Abbey Lincoln, and many other artists walked the path Holiday had drawn. Count Basie would say about Holiday years after her death, "Billie was America's conscience. They tried to silence her, but they could never completely cut off her voice. That voice still echoes today." The story that began on that night in 1947 wasn't just an arrest, but a painful part of America's process of confronting its own values. What Billie Holiday experienced showed how powerful a weapon music could be, and how this power could be found frightening. Lady Day's legacy is proof that the connection between art and political resistance will never be broken. What many people don't realize is that Billie Holiday wasn't alone in her fight against the Federal Narcotics Bureau. An underground network of jazz musicians, club owners, and civil rights activists had been quietly supporting her since the late 1940s. This network, led by figures like Leonard Feather and Norman Granz, understood that Holiday's persecution was part of a larger attack on black artistic expression. They organized secret fundraisers, provided legal support, and most importantly, created safe spaces where Holiday could still perform during her darkest years. Norman Granz, the legendary jazz impresario, was particularly instrumental in keeping Holiday's career alive. He structured his jazz at the Philharmonic tours specifically to include Holiday, knowing that concert halls fell outside the cabaret license restrictions. Granz later revealed that he had received multiple threats from federal authorities, warning him to drop Holiday from his roster. But he refused, understanding that this was bigger than one artist's career. It was about the future of artistic freedom in America. These tours became Holiday's lifeline, both financially and emotionally, providing her with the large audiences that still appreciated her art. The network also included unexpected allies. Frank Sinatra, despite his own complicated relationship with organized crime investigations, quietly supported Holiday behind the scenes. He arranged for private recording sessions at his own expense and helped finance her legal battles. Ella Fitzgerald, typically non-political in her public persona, spoke out against Holiday's treatment in rare interviews. Even Louis Armstrong, known for avoiding political controversy, made subtle references to Holiday's persecution in his performances. What makes Holiday's persecution even more complex is its international dimension. During the Cold War era, America's image abroad was crucial, and Strange Fruit had become a powerful piece of Soviet propaganda. Radio Moscow frequently played Holiday's recording while discussing American hypocrisy regarding racial equality. This international embarrassment made Holiday an even bigger target for federal authorities, who saw her as unwittingly aiding communist propaganda efforts. State Department cables from the period revealed deep concern about Holiday's international performances. When she toured Europe in the mid-1950s, American embassy officials monitored her concerts and reported back on audience reactions to Strange Fruit. European intellectuals and jazz fans saw Holiday as a symbol of authentic American artistry suppressed by an authoritarian government. This perception was exactly what Cold War America was trying to avoid. The irony wasn't lost on Holiday herself. In private conversations recorded by friends, she noted how she felt more free to express herself artistically in European venues than in her own country. European audiences embraced Strange Fruit as a masterpiece of social commentary, while American venues increasingly pressured her to avoid the song. This international appreciation provided Holiday with some validation during her darkest domestic struggles, but it also made her more dangerous in the eyes of federal authorities. The impact of Holiday's persecution extended far beyond her own career, influencing an entire generation of artists who came after her. Nina Simone directly credited Holiday's courage in performing Strange Fruit as inspiration for her own political activism through music. Abbey Lincoln studied Holiday's case when developing her own strategies for combining art and social protest. Even non-jazz artists like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez acknowledged Holiday's influence on their understanding of music as political resistance. The cabaret license system that destroyed Holiday's New York career became a rallying point for musicians' rights advocates. The Musicians' Union, initially reluctant to challenge government authority, eventually took up Holiday's cause as an example of artistic suppression. Legal precedents established during Holiday's license battles were later used to protect other artists facing similar persecution during the civil rights era. Perhaps most importantly, Holiday's story became a cautionary tale about the fragility of artistic freedom. Music schools began including her persecution as a case study in courses about art and politics. Her experience demonstrated how easily government power could be weaponized against individual artists, particularly those from marginalized communities who dared to speak uncomfortable truths. This story doesn't end here. The complete story of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit song, secrets hidden in FBI files, and unknown dramas Holiday experienced in her final years remain as stories waiting to be discovered. Don't miss the continuation of these stories by subscribing. One of the most disturbing aspects of Holiday's persecution involves her medical records from the final decade of her life. Recently declassified documents reveal that federal authorities had been monitoring Holiday's health status through cooperative doctors and clinic administrators. When Holiday entered Metropolitan Hospital in New York during her final illness in 1959, Federal agents were present not just to arrest her, but to control the narrative around her death. Dr. Louis Schweitzer, Holiday's personal physician during her final years, kept detailed notes about the unusual interference he experienced when treating her. According to his private journals, discovered after his own death in 1971, federal agents would appear at his office demanding information about Holiday's condition and treatment progress. They were particularly interested in any signs that she might be overcoming her addiction, as this would undermine their portrayal of her as irredeemably damaged. Even more shocking was the revelation that some of Holiday's medical treatments may have been deliberately sabotaged. Dr. Schweitzer noted several instances where medications prescribed for Holiday's liver condition were mysteriously unavailable at pharmacies she frequented. Alternative medications provided were often of inferior quality or inappropriate dosages. These coincidences happened too frequently to be accidental, suggesting a systematic attempt to prevent Holiday's recovery. The final insult came when Holiday lay dying in Metropolitan Hospital. Not only was she handcuffed to her bed under police guard, but federal agents controlled who could visit her. Close friends like Mal Waldron and Annie Ross were turned away, while reporters friendly to the Federal Narcotics Bureau were given access to photograph her in her deteriorated state. These images were then used to reinforce the narrative that Holiday's lifestyle had inevitably led to her destruction.